2:22 p.m. I didn't want to tell this story. That's the first thing you need to understand. I'm not someone who talks about things I can't explain. 11 years on this land, and I've learned that some things stay quieter when you don't give them language, when you don't pull them into the light and name them. But something happened last week. A missing persons report. Campsite 7, up on the North Ridge. And when I read the responding officer's notes, when I saw the description from the hiker's last voicemail to his wife, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Because I know that ridge. I know what's up there. And I think it's still looking. I'm going to tell you what I experienced. All of it. Not because I want to. Not because it makes me feel better to say it out loud. But because if you're planning to camp in that area, if you've already booked a site, if you're driving up this weekend, thinking it'll be peaceful, thinking it'll be beautiful, you need to hear this first. I'm not going to dress it up. I'm not going to make it sound like something from a movie. This is just what happened. Exactly how I remember it. And the parts I don't remember clearly, those are the parts that scare me the most. So, let's start at the beginning. I've been a reservation ranger for 11 years. Before that, 2 years as a wildlife technician in the same region. So when I tell you I know this land, I mean that in a way most people don't. I know its sounds. I know how it behaves at different hours, different seasons. I know what a disturbed elk herd looks like versus a spooked one. I know the difference between a predator moving through and something just passing by. I say that not to impress you. I say it so you understand what it means when I tell you I couldn't explain what I encountered. A man with my background, with my hours on that land, and I had no framework for it. Nothing in 11 years prepared me. I never filed a report about what happened.
That decision has sat with me ever since. Some nights it sits heavier than others. Last week, it got unbearable. The missing persons case. Hiker, male, 34 years old. Last known location, Campsite 7, North Ridge. His wife received a voicemail at 11:08 p.m. the night he disappeared. She played it for investigators. I wasn't in that room, but an officer I trust told me what was on it. The hiker whispered the whole message, barely audible. He said something was circling his tent, had been for almost an hour. He said, and this is the part I can't shake. He said it wasn't making any sound while it moved. That detail, that specific detail, I've never told anyone what I experienced up there. It's not in any report, it's not documented anywhere. But that's exactly what I heard too. The campgrounds sit at the edge of tribal land, not deep inside it, right at the boundary. Like whoever designated the sites decades ago knew, instinctively, not to push further in. There are 6 official sites along the Lower Ridge Trail. Campsite 7 is the last one. Technically still within the permitted recreation zone, but just barely. Push another quarter-mile north, and you're on land that isn't open to the public. Land that, depending on who you ask, isn't open to anyone. It's beautiful up there. I want to be honest about that. The kind of place that makes you understand why people drive 6 hours to sleep in a tent. Ponderosa pines so dense the afternoon light comes through in columns. A creek that runs clean and cold even in late summer. At night, no light pollution, just the sky doing things city people forget it can do. Families came every summer. Couples. Solo hikers looking to disappear for a few days in the best sense of that word. I patrolled those sites alone mostly. Welfare checks, fire regulation enforcement, the occasional lost tourist. Routine. Comfortable, even. I'd done it so many times the trail was automatic. My feet knew every route, every soft patch of ground.
For years, nothing happened that I couldn't explain. That's important to say. Because what came later wasn't the land changing. I think something moved into it. Something that had been further in decided to come closer. And the campgrounds were exactly close enough. 2:26 p.m. It started with a fire ring. Campsite 7.
Early September, a Tuesday morning. No guests had been booked at that site for 4 days. I'd checked the log before heading up. So when I saw the fire ring disturbed, I noticed. Ash scattered outward like something had moved through it or kicked it. Not wind. The surrounding pine needles were undisturbed. Whatever displaced that ash came from directly above it or moved through it deliberately. I crouched down and looked at the ground around the ring. That's when I saw the prints. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. I looked at those impressions for a long time. I've tracked deer, elk, black bear, mountain lion. I know what compression patterns look like for each. I know how weight distributes differently across species, how claw registration changes with gait. These didn't match anything. The stride length was wrong, too long for a bear, even a large one. The depth of impression suggested significant weight, but the shape wasn't right for anything I could place. 5 points of contact, not 4. Not claws exactly, but pressure marks, like something had been standing there. Standing, not passing through. I photographed them, logged it as unidentified wildlife activity, told myself I'd look into it. I didn't look into it. Looking back, I think part of me didn't want to. There was something about those impressions that made a quiet part of my brain say, "Leave this alone." I should have listened to that part. 2:26 p.m. The next 3 nights, I started hearing things I couldn't place. Not dramatic, nothing that would have made another person stop and stare. Just wrongness at the edges. Sounds that didn't fit the hour or the season. A low resonance around 2 a.m. Not a vocalization, exactly. More like pressure. Like the air itself was being displaced, somewhere in the tree line above the ridge. I'd step outside, and it would stop. Not fade, stop. Immediately. Like something knew I was listening. I told myself it was wind behavior. The canyon above Campsite 7 has unusual acoustics. I'd noticed that before. I held on to that explanation longer than I should have. Then a camper left without checking out. Couple, mid-40s. Booked for 4 nights, gone after 1. Gear still at the site. Tent still staked, camp stove still out. 1 boot sitting beside the fire ring. Just 1. I called the contact number on their reservation. The woman who answered. I assumed it was the wife. She said they left because her husband couldn't sleep. Said he kept hearing something outside the tent that their dog wouldn't stop growling at. Their dog, she said, finally just stopped growling, went completely still, pressed itself against her husband's legs, and wouldn't move until morning. She didn't sound frightened when she told me this. She sounded like she was trying not to be. I logged it, noted the abandoned equipment, filed it under early departure, personal reasons. Then 4 days later, I found the elk. Upper tree line, maybe 80 meters north of Campsite 7. Large bull. Dead. No visible cause. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no tracks around the body from any predator. But that wasn't the part that stayed with me. The part that stayed with me was the scavengers. There were none. In 3 days, nothing had touched it. No ravens, no coyotes, no insects beyond the basic. Like every living thing in that area had made a collective, silent decision to stay away. I stood there looking at that elk for a long time, and I had the distinct, specific feeling that something was watching me look at it. She came to the station on a Thursday morning. I say she, an elder from the reservation. I'm not going to use her name. That's not my information to share. She's known in the community, respected in a way that goes beyond age. The kind of person who, when she walks into a room, other people instinctively quiet down, without knowing why. She didn't call ahead, didn't knock, just appeared at my office door like she'd always been planning to come exactly then. She sat down across from me and looked at me for a moment before she spoke, not uncomfortably, just assessing, like she was deciding how much I could handle. Then she said a word, in Lakota. I won't attempt to reproduce it here because I don't want to get it wrong, and I don't think I should. But I asked her what it meant, and she paused before answering. She said there wasn't a clean translation. She said the closest English approximation was something like the one that tests the boundary, or maybe the thing that decides who crosses. She knew about the elk. I hadn't told anyone about the elk. She told me the North Ridge had been a boundary for a long time, that certain areas of this land had agreements attached to them, not legal agreements, older ones. She said something had been disturbed further up the mountain, something that had kept its distance for years was no longer keeping it. Then she looked at me very directly and said two things. Don't go to that ridge after dark, and, if you do, don't use a light. She didn't explain the second part. I asked her to. She just shook her head slowly, like the explanation would take longer than I had, or longer than she was willing to give. She left the same way she arrived. No goodbye. Just gone. I sat at my desk for a while after that, turning those two instructions over in my mind. I told myself I'd follow them. I meant it when I said it. 2:28 p.m. The call came in 6 days later. Welfare check request. Camper at Site 7 hadn't been seen by neighboring site occupants since the previous afternoon. No response to knocking. Tent still up. Car still in the lot. It was 10:50 p.m. I want you to understand the position I was in. This was my job. There was potentially a person in distress up there, medical emergency, injury, any number of things. I couldn't not go. I radioed for backup and was told the nearest available ranger was 40 minutes out. I made the decision to proceed. I told myself I'd be careful. I told myself I remembered what the elder said. I brought the flashlight anyway. The trail up to Site 7 takes about 20 minutes at a normal pace. I've walked it hundreds of times. That night, it felt different from the first 100 meters. Not visually. Everything looked exactly as it should, but something about the quality of the darkness was wrong. Fuller, somehow, like it had more weight than usual. Around the halfway point, the forest went quiet. I need to explain what I mean by that, because I've used that phrase and I know how it sounds. This wasn't the natural quiet of late-night wilderness. I've experienced that thousands of times. This was different. This was absence. Like every living thing, insects, small mammals, birds, everything had simply vacated. Not gone silent, gone. The emptiness had a pressure to it. I kept moving. I reached Site 7 and swept the flashlight across the camp. 10 sips shut, no movement inside. Camp stove cold. I called out. Nothing. Then the sound started. To my left, deep in the tree line, maybe 30 meters out. Not a vocalization. Movement. Heavy, deliberate movement through undergrowth. But here is what stopped my breath completely. It made no sound while it moved. The branches didn't snap. The undergrowth didn't compress audibly. I could feel the movement more than hear it. A presence displacing air, shifting the darkness somehow, like shadows reorganizing themselves around a mass I couldn't see. It was circling, slowly, methodically, the way something circles when it isn't hungry, when it's deciding.
I stood completely still, flashlight on, heart doing things I didn't know hearts could do. And I remembered in that exact moment what the elder had told me. Don't use a light. I didn't turn it off, not yet. I wasn't ready. I stood there for what felt like several minutes, the circling continuing at a constant radius, close enough that I should have been able to see something, a shape, a shadow, an outline. But there was nothing, just the sense of something enormous and patient, moving just beyond where my light reached, like it knew exactly where the light ended. I turned off the flashlight. I don't know exactly when I decided to. There wasn't a moment of courage. It wasn't that. It was more like my body made the decision before my mind caught up. 1 second the beam was out, cutting uselessly against the tree line. The next second, darkness, total and immediate. I want to describe what that darkness was like, but I'm not sure language works here. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was dimensional, like the darkness had layers to it, depth that went further than the physical space should have allowed. I've been in wilderness at night without a light source before, many times. This was not that. I stood still, controlled my breathing, counted slowly in my head to keep my mind from doing what it wanted to do. The circling stopped. Not gradually, immediately. The same way those nighttime sounds used to stop when I stepped outside. Instant, total.
total cessation. And in that stillness, I became aware of something that I have never, in 11 years, experienced in any forest, on any night, in any weather. I heard breathing that wasn't mine. Close, maybe 4 meters, to my right, slightly behind me. Slow and even, not labored, not excited, patient breathing. The breathing of something that was not frightened and was not in a hurry. I did not turn around. I want to be clear about that.
Every instinct I had was screaming at me to spin, to look, to confirm what was there. I did not move. Something, I don't know if it was rational thought or something older than rational thought, told me that turning around was the wrong choice, that looking directly at it was the wrong choice. So I stood there, 4 meters away from something breathing in the dark, for 40 minutes. I know that sounds impossible. I know, sitting here in the daylight describing it, it sounds like something a person couldn't do. But fear, at a certain level, doesn't produce panic. It produces a very specific kind of stillness, a shutdown. My body understood something my mind was still trying to process. At some point, the breathing changed, slightly. A longer exhale. And then, silence again. Different silence. Empty in the way the forest had been empty when I arrived, vacated. Whatever had been 4 meters behind me was no longer there. I knew it the same way you know when someone leaves a room, even with your back turned. I stood for another 10 minutes before I moved. I never turned around. Not once. To this day, I don't know what I would have seen. I think that might be the only reason I'm here to tell you this. 2:29 p.m. I walked out. Not fast. That was the thing. Something told me, clearly and without explanation, that speed was wrong, that running would redefine what I was in relation to whatever was in that forest. So I walked. Measured steps. Same pace I'd use on any normal patrol. Every instinct I had was pulling in the opposite direction, and I ignored all of it. The trail felt longer going out, not dramatically, just slightly, like the distances between landmarks had been quietly rearranged. The halfway point came later than it should have. The trail had appeared sooner than I expected after that. I've tried to make sense of that sense, and I can't. When I reached the road, I stopped, stood at the tree line, and just breathed for a moment.
The normal sounds of the lower elevation came back gradually. Insects, a distant creek, the ordinary texture of nighttime wilderness, like crossing an invisible threshold back into a world that operated by familiar rules. My radio was dead, fully charged when I'd left the station, dead now. Not low battery, dead. Wouldn't power on until I got back to my truck and let it sit for several minutes. I still don't have an explanation for that. I checked my phone for the time, 4:47 a.m. I had entered the trail at 11:20 p.m., 5 hours and 27 minutes. I have no memory of most of that time. In my experience, standing still in the dark for 40 minutes and then walking a 20-minute trail does not account for 5.5 hours. I sat in my truck for a while before I drove. I didn't feel relief. I want to be honest about that because people expect survival stories to end with relief. What I felt was something closer to the awareness of a very narrow margin, like I had passed through a gap that was exactly my width and no wider, and something on the other side had let me. I filed no report. I know how that sounds. I've thought about it every day since. But what would I have written? That I spent 5 unaccounted hours on a trail I've walked hundreds of times? That my radio died and came back? That something breathed 4 meters behind me in the dark and I never saw it? I would have been removed from my position. Or worse, someone would have gone up there to investigate. I couldn't have that on my conscience. The elder came back 2 days later. Same way as before. No call, no knock. Just there. She sat down and looked at me and didn't ask what happened. She already knew, I think. Or knew enough. She said only one thing before she left. It let you leave. 5 days of silence after that. I started to believe maybe it was over.
Maybe whatever boundary had been crossed had reestablished itself.
Maybe I could return to the work and carry this privately, and it would eventually calcify into something I could live around. Then last week, the missing persons report crossed my desk. Male hiker, 34, campsite 7. Last voicemail to his wife, something circling his tent, moving without sound. He hasn't been found. If you're planning to go up there, please, don't camp at Site 7. Don't go past the boundary markers on the North Trail. And if you're ever in that forest after dark and the sound disappears, don't turn on your light.